Hi, everybody. So today we're going to talk about a very important issue in understanding spiritual phenomena across the spectrum of Christian denominations. I come at this from a Catholic perspective, so I must take the position that Catholics, that the type of spiritual gifts that you find within the Roman Rite of Catholicism are legitimate. So, for example, there are types of spiritual gifts that are discussed in the history of the Eastern Church, in the Eastern Orthodox Church, that differ from the usual types of things that happen in the Western or Roman Catholic Church. And these are also distinct from spiritual phenomena that happen in the charismatic movement in the modern world. And so I want to discuss this issue because this is very important for understanding reconciliation of these groups and just understanding the whole subject in general and understanding our spiritual lives. So here's the thing. There is in the Western Church some certain styles of spirituality. So for example, books that are deeply recommended in the Western tradition, such as The Imitation of Christ, are disliked by some in the East and thought to be works of spiritual delusion. So in the Eastern Orthodox, they'd say this is not good. So, for example, also they might dislike Saint Francis of Assisi and they feel that he's too hot-blooded, so to speak. And there's these different ways of looking at, things like, I think a very good example of this also is to look at things like stigmata, to look at these type of gifts or these type of occurrences. And this is different than what you usually see in the Eastern Orthodox or the Eastern Fathers. One of the gifts, whereas we might have stigmata, this very fleshly looking type of gift in addition to things like speaking in tongues, meaning speaking in foreign languages in the Roman Rite. So for example, let's look at St. Padre Pio. St. Padre Pio is able to speak French, without learning it. And he's able to be heard in speaking Italian. He's able to be heard like in English in certain anecdotes people tell. And he also had the stigmata. This is different than some elders from Mount Athos who, in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, they tend to shine from their face with the light of Tabor. There are also things where they do use the apostolic type gift of speaking in tongues. They may be speaking in one language that the person is hearing in the other. So you'll see that there's a similarity in the apostolic gifts like tongues and stuff, but a difference in the expression of some of these different things. So you'll see, like in the East, you'll see this shining of the face with the light of Tabor, like Christ on the Mount of Transfiguration, whereas you'll see in the West this thing of having injuries on your body, like the crucifixion. So what do we make of this? Well, in the Eastern Orthodox Church, they say, well, there seems to be criticisms of the Western saints. This can't be embraced by a Catholic because we have to say that our saints are okay. It doesn't mean we have to pass judgment on every single ability of every single saint. Every single ability of every single saint. Even sometimes it's funny. The Orthodox might say, sometimes every saint has, like in their tradition, some of them may have a delusion, like, oh, they had this person had this gift, but it was a false gift. Like there was actually a thing I read. They said some saints would describe things and they may have a mistaken understanding of something and so on and so forth. That was from an Eastern Orthodox source, so I'm not making that up. But here's the thing. You can't throw out the Western saints if you're a Roman Catholic or united to the Church of Rome and are Catholic. So what's the thing? How do we understand this? How do we bring all these things together? I think that the gifts of the Eastern Orthodox saints are real. So how can we make one type of thing like this? So let's begin by reconciling these two things. Let's say that Catholicism is like a rock. It's also very similar to, if we look at Catholic art and the things like stigmata, it's very rock solid. It's very concrete. It looks just like the photograph of what happened at the crucifixion. If you look at the Eastern Orthodox art, it's more like it's icons. It's more stylized. It's not as gritty, not as concrete. And the same thing with their experience of these extraordinary gifts. They have the normal apostolic gifts, like being able to speak other languages, and they can shine with the light of Tabor. I accept that they shine with the light of Tabor. That's fine. I just want to also say that that's like, we have to also acknowledge that the Catholics can have their own saints that are more like that concrete, real image of what happened in the crucifixion. Sorry, my nose keeps getting itchy. So the other thing that we want to think about here is this deep reality of the sense that there's that deep reality of the fact that, like, so it's almost like we have this rock, and the Orthodox are more like a cave. And so we don't want to oppose the cave to the rock. So we have to say, yes, let's accept this, like just like the Eastern Catholics might say, okay, yes, the Western saints are real, and you can reconcile a cave and a rock, because you can make a cave inside a rock. You just can't say the space in the cave is opposed to the rock. Accept the rock and the cave. Accept the legitimacy of the Western saints and the legitimacy of the Eastern ones, the type of saint that is. So yes, that's okay. Now, what do we do about the charismatic movement? Traditionalist Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox kind of don't like the new type of gifts or the modern expression of Pentecostal charismatic spirituality. Mainstream Catholics are okay with this. A few Orthodox are okay with this. Most are not, as far as I understand this. I've read some things on this. So, how are we gonna make this function here? Well, there are and they talk about how there's delusions and errors in Pentecostalism and charismaticism. Well, how do we fix this? Well, we fix this by realizing that there's good in charismatic and Pentecostal spirituality, but there's need for modification. So, in a way, like, one is like old style gifts of Catholicism are like a rock. Eastern Catholicism is like a cave in a rock. Pentecostalism is like sand, because there's delusion. Like, we think we have the same gifts as the apostles when we probably don't. There might be times when you might get them because God might be generous, but it doesn't seem like it's the exact same thing. So it's more like sand. So how can we reconcile this? Well, there are ways, once we understand what we're dealing with, and when we realize that the Pentecostal movement has kind of democratized spiritual gifts by developing a type of gift that operates at a different level of the personality and the heart, we can redeem this, because when we understand what it is, we don't fall into delusion. And then when we reinterpret it according to Catholic logic, we can kind of redeem this thing without letting it go to our heads and think we're super advanced like Padre Pio. While we can grow in these things, if this happens to be what seems to be God's working in our lives, it makes sense that we're going to go this way. So we can make sandstone. Rather than sand, we can make sandstone, and add that to this rock, cave in the rock, sandstone. We can make this like rock, and at the same time, there are I think this is a way of reconciling these things. It's a way of bringing these things together, so that the charismatic gifts can be reconciled with all these things. Then you can have all of these things available to a person to be able to develop their personality. And to add something to this also is that there are further types of things that may be practices that might be prayerful and imaginative and things like that, that might be in a very broad sense hypnotic, because visualization is hypnotic in a sense, maybe not in the exact sense that we might understand that term normally, but these other forms of prayer can be found. These other types of practices can be found, such as imaginative prayer, in the Ignatian tradition. I mean, that's a traditional expression of it more so, but even like, so let's say you're doing something that's more of a natural thing, and that leads to, and if let's say you do some type of like an imaginary process to get rid of physical pain, rather than using a gift, rather than using a prayer. It's like a really strong, mostly prayer with words. It could be like, okay, let me use various practices like those that can be used for pain reduction that involve imagination. You could prayerfully do that. Um, and you could do that if you do that prayerfully and you understand that it's not like a supernatural healing gift, then that becomes, rather than something like a wild forest around this rock and the cave in the rock and the sandstone that's there, we can understand this rather than this wild forest that's around that's not connected to this. We could make petrified wood, and we could add that. Petrified wood is kind of like wood that's become a stone as a fossil. And we could add this to the harmony of the rock of Catholicism. And so we can use our semi-natural abilities to heal and reduce pain. We can use the charismatic gifts of the Pentecostal movement. We can use with modification, with understanding, with modification, um, and and we can understand all these things as part of one coherent whole, one coherent rock of Catholicism in which we can trust.